Welcome to Allies or Enemies. I'm Jess.
And I am Sean. And today we are talking about 3 games that surprised us. So all 3 of these games, when we first heard about them, we weren't sure. We weren't sure that these were going to be fits for us. And in some cases, we held off playing these games for years. And when we finally did play them though, well, we were surprised.
So we're going to be talking about In the Footsteps of Darwin, Western Legends, and Glow. Let's get to it.
In the Footsteps of Darwin, you are on Darwin's famous voyage. On your turn, you can choose one of the 3 tiles in front of the HMS Beagle. Then move the Beagle based on how far away that tile was. And add the tile to your board on the space that matches its region and type. These tiles also gain things like compasses and chart tokens, which are multiplied for points, guides, which help you move the Beagle, and endgame points. Also, if you make a row or column, you get a publication token. And if you build on top of a tile, you get a theory, which will score endgame points. Once both players have 12 tiles, the game's over, and the greatest naturalist is named.
In the Footsteps of Darwin is a game we played before, but we played it very quickly at a convention years ago. And when we sat down to play it, we thought it was the other Darwin game, which is way heavier. It's like Darwin's Journey. And so we had very different expectations. And after playing it, we're like, that was much lighter than expected. And so we didn't revisit it. But then we played the In the Footsteps of Marie Curie, and we really liked that and thought it was like a great entry-level game that highlighted a cool scientist. And so when we got offered a review copy of In the Footsteps of Darwin, we thought, yeah, let's give that another go.
Yeah, and I'm glad we did too, because we were totally unfair on it the first time. But now that I know what it is, I really did appreciate it once we started playing it, because this is just a really tight gateway game. It's just a very light game where you're drafting tiles and you're adding those tiles to your grid, and then you're scoring those tiles in fun, interesting, different ways. It actually kind of reminds me a bit of Captain Flip in how those tiles interact and just kind of in how it plays.
Yeah, and it is really simple, but there are like different strategies you can do because you're only taking 12 tiles in total, and that is not a lot. So which tiles you take is really important, and how far your ship moves is really important, because you want to make sure your opponents don't get what they want, but you also might be trying to think ahead to see if you can set yourself up for like your next turn, especially at 2 players, to get the ship moving just far enough that you think you can then get a tile you want.
Yeah, and I like this game at 2 players because that what you're taking has like a few different implications, and I think probably more so than at more players, because I know exactly what you want. And so sometimes I'm going to pick one that I need just a little bit less because I know you really want one that's like 2 away, because the tile that you draft is influencing how far that ship moves. And so you can make it so that the other person has trouble getting what they want to get. And if they don't have one of those little portrait tokens, they can't do anything about that. So I do really like that kind of head-to-headness of when you're drafting the tiles.
Yeah, and I also just love the production too. And that was something we missed out a little bit sitting down at a demo table when we first played it, because when we opened it up, every player board is like a beautiful journal with a different animal, and like different sketches for purely aesthetic reasons. It has nothing to do with gameplay, but it looks amazing. And I think that In the Footsteps in general, the series seems to be really targeting an entry-level game of like simple to explain and focusing on one kind of mechanic in a really like lovely production.
Yeah, and I like that both of them as well have that appendix book that has just stuff about the scientist, that you can learn all sorts of stuff about the actual voyage of the HMS Beagle. It's interesting too, because we were talking about like, why isn't there a movie about this? And then we're reading it, it's like, because everything kind of went well. It's like, oh, and then they went to that place and they found what they wanted, and they sent it back, and everyone was happy. So it wouldn't be an interesting movie, but it is an interesting game. And it is also important to note that while we were surprised about it, and we do like it, it is still a very light entry weight game. So go into this with kind of that Captain Flip like expectation. It's super quick, super like head-to-head kind of feeling, and just that quick drafting. But we've had actually a surprising amount of fun with it.
In Western Legends, you take on the role of a Western legend. On your turn, you can take 3 actions, including moving, cattle rustling or wrangling, mining, fighting bandits, robbing banks, playing poker, and buying stuff from the general store. All of this is done in the hopes of gaining money, points, and movement up the wanted or marshal tracks, depending on the kind of stuff you do. A lot of these actions will also be using your multi-use poker cards, including resolving the fights you get into with bandits, the sheriff, and other players. There is a lot more to this game than that, including player-specific goals and powers and shared goal cards, but generally, the robbing and rustling continues until someone reaches the target score, and then the true Western legend is named.
Western Legends is a game we've had our eye on for years. Specifically, Sean has had his eye on for years. We've almost bought it, I think like 4 or 5 times.
At least.
But every time we've gone to buy it, we've looked at reviews and people said the base game just doesn't really work at 2. And we usually play just at 2 players. So we thought, like, what's the point in getting a game if we can only play it when we're more than 2? So we held off until finally you found like a used copy online and we're like, all right, now let's try it.
Yeah, someone was selling it for super cheap. They also happened to live like a few blocks from us. So I was like, well, we've got to finally do this. And boy, am I happy that we did. Because it wasn't even just the 2-playerness. It was also that it looked like, because it's a sandbox game, often that kind of means pick up and deliver, which I don't love. It also looked like there was going to be dice rolling. I don't know why I thought that, because there isn't really. There's a bunch of stuff in it that I thought, oh, I don't know. But oh my goodness, when I say I love this game, I am underselling that by a lot. We have bought, I think, 3 different expansions for it. It's one of those that we played once and I was already like, I gotta get more. I need everything that there is in this world. And I think there's a few different reasons that I love it. First of all, it's just so thematic. And I grew up in Calgary. It is like the cowboy town of cowboy towns. And so I grew up with this kind of around me. And so I appreciate that part of it for sure. But also it really is a sandbox game. I really feel like I can go down different paths, but not with all of this like mechanics overhead, because the stuff you're doing pretty simple for the most part. Like you're mining, you're just rolling dice. You're horse wrangling, you're just picking up horses and kind of, that is like
cows.
a pick up and, sorry, yes, cows. That is like a pick up and deliver game. You're playing poker, you're playing poker. That's exactly what that sounds like. And you can do different little, like you can go down, the main paths you can really go down are the bad guy and the good guy. And you can be a bad guy and you can rob banks, and when you got the expansion, you can rob the train, and you can do all of these fun bad guy stuff, or you can be a good guy and you can go around arresting those bandits. And if you're Jess, trying to arrest the other player, which is me, and she's always a good guy. I'm always a bad guy. I feel like this is very fitting for our personalities, but man, this game, it's got those stories in it that I love, that like emergent narrative.
Yeah, and it is interesting because when you are a bad guy, you get a point at the end of your turn if you're still a bad guy. So you're putting a target on your back, which is why I can't let you just always be a bad guy. I have to go and try and arrest you. And I think that's a smart mechanic. And you mentioned how it doesn't really use any dice, and what it does do instead are use like a deck of cards, but each of the cards has not only like the value, because it's like a poker deck, but also an action too. And so you can use those cards in really interesting ways of being able to like move further, but they're also used for like fighting each other, and they might have cool powers of, you might lose the fight because you have a low value card, but you can at least like injure the other person. And I think it does a really good job of using those cards in everything basically that you're doing, that keeps the rule set pretty simple. You just have this great player aid for what each location does.
Yeah, this giant player aid. But yeah, it is great that those cards are poker cards, action cards, fighting cards, that they are everything. And we did say at the start that we were worried about this being a 2-player game. Just to be clear, it's not really a 2, like it's not at its best at 2 players. There's no sugarcoating that. It is 100% true. It's got this deck that's this man in black who really, he just gets rid of bandits and comes and fights you. And that's kind of the 2 things that he does, and he does them over and over, and is honestly a little bit frustrating and is a little bit upkeep, but I still have more fun playing this at 2 than I do playing a lot of other games, even though it is absolutely not at its best. It's at like kind of 70% of what it can be, but that 70%, I still enjoy. I still have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, and you start the game with a different character that gives you a player power, but if you know like the actual like outlaws and cowboys, then it's just really fun to play into those characters. Like we watched Tombstone before we first played it, and then we were Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, and so it was like, okay, well, what would Doc Holliday do? And it lends itself to being able to do that.
Yeah, and I like that this game gave me a chance to actually get Jess to watch some of the cowboy movies that I really liked, especially, so we are kind of focusing on the 90s ones, although I got you to watch Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid as well, which is also a classic, but also Tombstone, Young Guns. There's so many cowboy movies that I really enjoyed, and there was that like weird pocket in the 90s of terrific cowboy movies, and so that plays into it as well. And just the different characters, it's nice that they all have thematic powers, and once you get those expansions, there are so many different Wild West characters that you can be in this game, and such a cool like mix of different characters too. It's just, yeah, this is a game I think about when I'm not playing it, and there aren't a lot of games where that is true for.
And if you are interested in getting the expansions, they are very difficult to find.
Real pain in the butt.
There's like one store in Canada that shipped internationally that still had it available that I was able to get one of them, but definitely worthwhile. And after we played this, Sean has been like, are there other games like this? And you haven't been able to find an answer yet.
Yeah, people have mentioned a couple, but it's always like, but they're a little bit pick up and deliver. So I'm hoping Vantage does a similar thing with a sandbox, but it's not cowboys, and I love cowboys, and I love Western legends.
Glow is a dice-chucking, card-drafting race to make light. On your turn, you will draft a card, taking both that card and the dice on its slot, and then roll the dice you gain to activate all of the cards in your row. This may gain you good stuff like points or rerolls or fireflies, or bad stuff like death. Then, after you've resolved your cards, you will use your dice to explore the map, gaining more stuff. The game ends after round 8 when you count up points from explored lands, surviving companions, and fireflies, and the greatest adventurer is named.
Glow was one that I hadn't even heard of, and then you were showing the game at Essen for the first time, and your first thought was, wow, this looks amazing. And then you were described like how it plays, and it is a ton of dice rolling. That is the main thing that you're doing, and we're usually not that into games that involve dice rolling because you just end up with like really bad luck. But this was an exception for one that we still enjoy even with the dice rolling.
Yeah, I really was on the fence about it. And again, full disclosure, this is a review copy that I got in Essen, and our copy is in French, which was neither here nor there. We were able to print off the English rules because Jess refused to teach it to me in French. But it was a big surprise, and I think part of that surprise is that the dice rolling, while it is obviously dice rolling, it's a little bit more nuanced than I had first thought, because when you're drafting, you can, like a real strategy in this game is to not take a lot of dice and to take characters that kind of want you not to have dice, because some of the characters, instead of wanting to get their thing to get points, you don't want to get their thing because then they die and some negative effect happens, or they just die and you don't get their points because they're worth big value if you can keep them to the end of the game. And so that is really interesting, that it's like, if you have bad dice luck, that's fine. Just do this thing. But also because you can really kind of focus on which dice am I taking and how is that going to work with my cards, and then try to get cards that like synergize together.
Yeah, definitely. That is the really key thing, because if you can get ones that want the same things or don't want the same things, then that makes it really easy to decide what dice you want to try and keep. And the different colored dice have like more likelihood of having different elements as well, so that might influence your decision. And this is a drafting game, but I find it works really well at 2 players players, because if you're first, you get to draft first, then you get to get rid of somebody. So that gives you an opportunity to like mess with your opponent, where you can still pick what you want and then get rid of the one you think that they want. And it's nice to like just have a little bit more like going into the drafting.
Yeah, absolutely. Because yeah, you've got 100% of the choice. You're giving them 60% of the choice, which obviously makes a big difference. Also, this game obviously is beautiful. Like, it is so, so pretty. This is Vincent Dutrait, and it's got this like Tim Burton-esque look to everything too, with the black and white, but then with the really vibrant colors coming out from that black and white. It's a stunning game. And this is another gateway game as well. And we kind of went up and up and up, and I think a lot of board gamers find this, that you get heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier, and then you kind of find where your comfort zone is with heaviness. And then you kind of find that, you know what, I kind of miss when we just played those like light games. When we played those games, we could learn in 10 minutes and just get to the table and teach to anybody. And I love having a mix of that sort of game. And this does that really well, because it's just super simple drafting, but then it's rolling a lot of dice. And I think a lot of new gamers like that. They like that tactile thing. It's the thing that you hold on to, right? It's the thing that was in all the games you played as a kid. And so it's nice that a game is like bringing that in and really embracing that.
Yeah, and I really enjoy rolling all of the dice. And there is a little bit of mitigation, because you frequently can get the reroll tokens, or you can just like go back and get them too if you're feeling really stuck. So I feel like you're not always just at like the will of the dice gods. And there are two different sides to play. They're not drastically different, but it is nice to have that option.
Yeah, and they do feel different enough as well. And I like that, one side's got boats, one side you're putting down tents. I think that's really nice. And the different starting spirits make a pretty big difference in this, what their powers are. And I really like that there are 4 or 5 spirits that have these giant powers, that have like extra things. One of them has this like evil black dice. One of them has all these tokens that you don't otherwise use, and you just use with that one spirit. So when you get those, or I don't know if they're called spirits, whatever they are, but when you get those, it feels like this big event, and it's only like once every however many games that someone's gonna use those. But they massively change things, and I really appreciate that they put in all these other things that you're only going to use in like this small percentage of games.
Yeah, the first time we played, we didn't get the one that gave you the tokens. And at the end, we're like, wait, what are all of these tokens for? And then realized it was just tied to this one spirit. And when they come up, you're like, oh, I definitely want it. And it may not work for your strategy, but because they're so different from everything else, it does lead you to be like, I want to take this one.
Yeah, and it's nice too that new players don't have to deal with those. So you can have really simple mechanics if you want to. You can slightly level it up if you want to as well. Again, this is another one like in the Footsteps of Darwin that have those expectations. This is very much a gateway game. It's very much a quick game. This is the sort of game that you can teach to folks in 5 minutes. And so that is, that's the framework of what this game is. But at the same time, it's a good one, and it's one you can teach quick, but it's one that's going to bring people in because of that theme, because of the art, and because you get to use these nice dice, and they're pretty dice, and it just does such a good job of tying in those dice to that simple drafting mechanic.
And there is a new expansion for this one, but we haven't been able to find it yet in English, but I am curious as to how it changes things.
And that is it. That is 3 games that we weren't sure we were going to like, and we even pushed back on playing a little bit, but really did surprise us. And what are some games that you found the same with? What are some games that you avoided playing for a while, and then were a little bit pleasantly surprised with how they played?
Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you next time for another game.